In 1876, Istanbul, a heavy fog hangs over the Golden Horn, and something even heavier hangs in the palace corridors: fear. Because when Abdülhamid takes the throne, he doesn't just inherit a state, he inherits a system in which two sultans have already been deposed and one of them has died under suspicious circumstances. In the back of everyone's mind, the same question is quietly burning: who's next? In the first days of his reign, an constitution is proclaimed, the Kanun-i Esasi. An empire suddenly begins speaking the language Europe respects: parliament, law, representation, a bicameral legislature, the elected Meclis-i Mebusan and the appointed Meclis-i Ayan. On paper, it feels like the door to a modern order has been cracked open, but before the ink on that paper has even dried, continents tremble. War conditions, internal power struggles, and the empire's famous sense of being one step away from breaking apart make that constitutional order instantly fragile. Not long after, the parliament is effectively sidelined. The constitution, oddly, continues to exist as if it's still alive, in yearbooks, in official records, in formal language, like a display item in a shop window. It's there, but it doesn't work. From this point on, the state's main language changes. Instead of politics, it speaks precaution. Instead of representation, it speaks control. Instead of openness, it speaks secrecy. And the mechanism that will come to symbolize Abdülhamid's era begins to expand: the intelligence network and the flood of informants. Denunciation stops being a mere state reflex and becomes part of daily life. People watch one another. Neighbor informs on neighbor, brother on brother, even children on their parents, so the stories go. The darkest part is this: it isn't always ideology that drives it. Sometimes it's survival. Informing turns into a livelihood, and more unsettling still, it's said that even when a report proves false, the person who filed it might still receive the promised payment. That tells you what kind of psychology the system produces. Truth isn't the requirement. What matters is that something has been written. Then, after 1909, picture this scene: Sultanahmet Square. Hundreds of thousands of denunciation papers burned in a public ceremony. As ash rises into the air, an entire archive of fear goes up with it. But even that burning carries a thin layer of irony. What if their own reports are mixed in? Because in a system like that, everyone leaves a trace. Censorship doesn't only hover over newspapers, it hovers over words themselves. There are symbolic bans that sound almost like folklore, but reveal the spirit of the time. Certain words become suspicious, certain plays become dangerous, certain stories are treated as threats. Even a Shakespeare play about toppling a throne can be seen as giving the wrong ideas. Language itself is something to be managed, because if it isn't, one day it might manage you. At the same time, another image is just as striking: the navy rotting in the Golden Horn. The ships of a great empire lie there like a body, rusting, moss-covered, waiting. Keeping the fleet idle doesn't only reflect weakness, it reflects rule by fear. A strong navy may deter enemies abroad, but it can also create power centers at home. And Abdülhamid's deepest fear is often not outside the state, but inside it. The empire's greatest internal ghost is the Abdülaziz affair. A deposed sultan and then a death. The belief that it was murder hangs over politics like poison for years. Then comes the Yıldız tribunal. Figures like Mithat Pasha stand trial. Death sentences are issued, then converted to exile. The story of Mithat Pasha being sent to Taif and later strangled becomes a symbol of how thin the line between courtroom and execution can become. The empire is not only losing territory, its legal ground is becoming slippery. One of the most haunting symbols of Abdülhamid's accession is the acting enthronement document. Imagine taking the throne with a text that essentially says, "I am assuming power temporarily. When my brother recovers, I will step aside."
It bears Abdülhamid's signature and those of leading pashas. It reads less like a coronation than like a crisis note. Murad V's illness, his secluded life at Faria, the unfulfilled possibility of his return, and the way a temporary solution becomes permanent. Abdülhamid's rule begins with a psychological paradox, sitting on a throne that feels from day one like it could be reclaimed. The Mithat Pasha story doesn't end there. His repeated exiles, his flight into Europe, his turning to consulates for protection, and then the claim of a Tunisia bargain, the rumor that concessions over Tunisia were tied to the handling of Mithat's case. Whether true or not, the rumor itself reveals the era's logic. Sometimes an internal judicial file and a foreign policy file can end up on the same table. Inside the country, Abdülhamid's era is also remembered for public works, education, and livelihood, schools, investments, order, and in everyday language, cheapness. But there is a mechanism behind that cheapness: debt. The reality of the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, the 1881 settlement, the loss of fiscal sovereignty, the partial surrender of revenues to creditors. People may feel daily life is steadier, even calmer, while the state's future becomes more expensive. This is also the period when ties with Germany become highly visible, especially through the Baghdad Railway concession. It's not merely a rail line, it carries economic privileges along its route, including access to resources. The railway becomes an economic hand reaching into the ground. Meanwhile, stories spread about the plundering of historical artifacts, excavations, objects taken abroad, a careless mentality that shrugs, stone is everywhere. Sometimes the empire treats even its own heritage as disposable weight. Abdülhamid's foreign policy is a balancing act: Britain, France, Germany, an attempt to survive through careful calibration. One tool in that balancing act is pan-Islamic policy, the caliphate, the effort to connect with Muslims beyond the empire's borders. It's described as a kind of glue, something used to keep the empire's internal pieces stuck together. And then 1905, the Yıldız assassination attempt. It plays like a film scene: the Friday procession, a ruler known for punctual routine, conspirators counting on that punctuality, and then a delay of just a few minutes. A bomb hidden in a carriage explodes, dozens dead, bodies torn apart, horses killed, panic everywhere. What stands out in the telling is Abdülhamid's composure, calming people with "don't be afraid," even driving his own carriage. It captures his instinctive style: suppress fear, manage the image, control the crisis by owning the stage.
The fact that an official report on the attack was prepared in French and printed in limited copies points to another reality. The state also plays to Europe's gaze: modern paperwork, dossiers, archival habits. The later story of that report being sold at auction in Paris, bought by the grandson of the bomb placer Joris, someone said to want to finish the story his grandfather left incomplete, is history's dark joke: a family purchasing the document of an unfinished assassination. They even got freed because of the capitulation agreements also. Another shadowy thread is the Ottoman bank raid and the rumors that followed, claims that militants were released, even placed on salaries. What matters here is not the final truth of every rumor, but the picture people form of the method. Abdülhamid doesn't always crush opponents, sometimes he neutralizes them. Salary, position, promises, a way of extinguishing political danger without open confrontation. In 1908, constitutional rule returns, spoken of as the restoration of liberty. Yet almost immediately, the empire seems to rupture from within, the 31st March incident. "We want Sharia" is the slogan on the surface, but the layers beneath are many: troop movements, tensions inside the army, conflicts between old-style officers and modern trained ones, resentment in religious circles, the influence of different ethnic and political factions. Everyone pours their own grievance into the same chant. Debates over whether soldiers entered parliament, accounts claiming they gave orders, a commander lynched in front of Yıldız, and the alleged ambiguous gesture from the palace balcony: kill him or spare him, a detail that remains unresolved and therefore eternally argued.
Then the Action Army arrives under Mahmud Şevket Pasha. It enters Istanbul, crushes the uprising, but what is crushed is not only rebellion, it is Abdülhamid's political fate. After this, a seal is stamped on the old regime. Even words begin to drift in meaning. Reactionary shifts in usage, first pointing at supporters of the old order, later taking on other connotations entirely. In 1908, Abdülhamid is deposed. He is sent to Salonik, to the Alatini mansion. And there is a small detail that says a lot. He is not given his woodworking tools. This is not only restriction, it's symbolism. Even what keeps your hands busy is placed under control. When the Balkan War makes Salonik unsafe, he is brought back to Istanbul, to Beylerbey Palace. He dies there in 1918. As his funeral passes, a story is told of women crying from windows, "Our Sultan who gave us cheap bread." That scene seals Abdülhamid's double signature in public memory. On one side, repression, surveillance, censorship. On the other, stability, order, and the felt memory of being able to afford the basics. That cheapness may have been subsidized and paid for by the future, but public memory often preserves the feeling more than the mechanism. On the cultural side, a different current flows. The story of Fahim Pasha, an intelligence chief who becomes hated for arrogance, exiled, then lynched in 1908. And then a romance and the strange journey of a song. Lyrics that begin as "Remember Margaret, that famous night," later shifting into "Hatırla A. Perry," even being adapted in later political eras. That is another truth of history. Regimes change, but songs often outlive regimes. Their words change, their melody remains. And while Istanbul is living through these tensions, Europe is in the Belle Epoque. Art, literature, bohemian circles, absinthe rituals, opium waves, a cultural revolution. In the same time window, 1905 sees Einstein publishing papers that reshape physics, while a bomb explodes at Yıldız. History can fit two different ages into the same year. Abdülhamid's personal interests add further texture to the portrait. Photography, the Yıldız albums, the effort to document the empire visually, a modern archival obsession. Today, those albums stand like a visual memory of a vanished world, cities, roads, people, institutions. Stories also circulate of his interest in detective fiction, his admiration for Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes, even claims that he awarded the writer a medal. Details like these crack the idea of a one-dimensional ruler, a repressive government style paired with a fascination for modern information tools. There are also debates about language itself, new words, signage, the sense of imitation, the shrinking space of Turkish on the streets. These two connect to a deeper crisis, identity. The empire isn't only politically uncertain, it is culturally uncertain, arguing with itself about what it is and where it belongs. Even everyday life keeps transforming. Early football in Kadıköy with British players, the first teams and rumors around them. While the state searches for threats, society invents new entertainments. Claims that oil wrestling was pushed outside the city for crowd control and security reasons reflect the same instinct. Anything large, anything uncontrolled becomes suspicious. Then there are the Young Turks, factional struggles, outside support rumors, especially the idea of British money backing certain groups. The Herzl correspondence and the endless conspiratorial questions, Jews, Freemasons, shadow networks. In Abdülhamid's era, the boundary between history and rumor is constantly blurred because it is an era that already feels like closed doors. That's why speculation grows easily. In the end, the last years are quiet. Health, personal habits, the stillness of Beylerbey. First-hand sources, letters from his youngest son, Abd Effendi, accounts of exile nights, Salonik life, return to Istanbul. These shift the story from political legend to human reality, being taken from power in a single night, the narrowing of life, the way an enormous history can collapse into the walls of one palace room. And the most accurate sentence about Abdülhamid is this: he did not save the empire, but he became one of the clearest examples of how an empire behaves when it is collapsing, what instincts it clings to, what fears it lives with, and what methods it uses to buy time. In his era, the state bought control at the price of political freedom. Society learned silence at the price of speech. Finance normalized living by debt at the price of sovereignty. And while all of this was happening, people still talked about bread prices. Songs kept changing their words. New sports spread. Signs multiplied. Novels were read. Photographs were taken. So the story didn't only happen in the palace. The story was a story of a time when fear and everyday life flowed side by side inside one empire, at the same moment in the same streets.
Öksüz yetimlere gözyaşı döktürmekten mütenezzih olan 600 senelik muhteşem, muzaffer bir milletin tarihini şair muti askerleri cebren ve tav'an ediliyorlar. İşte bu şühedanın içinde gelelerden bile bakmaya cesaret edemiyorlar. Makar hürriyetin istisali için benimle beraber İstanbul'a girecek İçinizde kaç kahraman var? Son damlasını vatanın meşrutiyeti istisali için dökmekten, bu uğurdan güle güle can girmekten. İstina...